Well, hey, what's up, YouTube? Hey, I don't know if you heard the scuttlebutt from this weekend, but apparently the CEO of Twitter itself, Jack Dorsey, had to apologize to the world for eating Chick-fil-A during, get this, Gay Pride Month, which is this month, the month of June. Yeah, actually what happened is kind of an interesting story. So Jack Dorsey from Twitter, not exactly known as a conservative bastion of traditional ideas. Anyways, this same Jack goes to Chick-fil-A, he eats there at the restaurant, and he tweets something about having been there. And all of a sudden, in the Twitterverse, there is this outrageous response and backlash to the CEO of Twitter having eaten at Chick-fil-A during June. Now, why would that be a problem, you ask? Well, that goes back 6 years to the founder and CEO of Chick-fil-A and the controversy from more than almost half a decade ago in regard to his biblical position on traditional marriage. And so Chick-fil-A is now out as an acceptable option for dining and eating chicken sandwiches during Gay Pride Month because it's no longer politically correct to do so. So what happens to Jack Dorsey? Well, after getting ripped on Twitter by no one else than Soledad O'Brien from CNN, amongst hundreds of other followers on Twitter, Jack Dorsey had to apologize to the world for eating at a chicken sandwich restaurant in June. Now, if that seems a little bit bizarre to you, it seems bizarre to me as well. And the reason it seems so bizarre is who makes these rules? Where do these rules come from? And under what moral authority are these rules inscribed in the new cultural, moral ethos of our society? Well, nobody has the answers to those questions, of course. I remember when I was a kid, we used to play kickball in the streets, and one of the rules that we played by was no new rules in the middle of the game. You had to establish what the rules were in order to play the game in the first place, and you could not add new rules once the game had commenced. Well, our culture is in such a place today that we continue to add new rules in the middle of the game. We continue to add things that are no longer acceptable to talk about, whether those categories would be in regard to race or gender or age or you name it. We continue to push ideas to the margins. We're moving closer and closer to a full censorship society that companies like Twitter, Facebook, and Google have a tremendous amount of power to determine what is socially acceptable speech and what is not socially acceptable speech. Of course, the universities have drawn fairly rigid lines as well as to what is acceptable to speak about or to write about or to even research. And now, if you didn't know it, the moral line in the sand is that you cannot eat at Chick-fil-A in June. So where do these rules come from? Who makes them up? Under what moral authority are they inscribed? Again, nobody has the answers to those questions. Ironically, I find it interesting that one of the reasons that people say that they're not a Christian is that they find that religion has too many do's and don'ts, that it has too many rules in the rule book, and that people would rather be free than to abide by somebody else's moral code. Well, now we can thoroughly question whether or not the progressive movement, whether we call it liberalism or we call it social justice warriors or whatever other progressive terms we want to entitle the movement, now we can truly begin to question whether or not this movement has too many rules. How could you possibly know all of the rules? How could you possibly know all of the ways that you can violate somebody else's moral code? Well, of course, that's impossible. And if you do happen to be a progressive or a liberal or a social justice warrior, one of the greatest things that you can do is nail somebody else for the hypocrisy of the new rule that you wrote in the middle of the game. So therefore, when Soledad O'Brien nails Jack Dorsey of Twitter for violating a rule that she apparently made up in the middle of the game, you can't eat chicken sandwiches in the month of June, of course, the whole nation realizes this backlash and they support this new rule. And so what we're doing is we're further and further and further marginalizing almost any idea that goes out of the core progressive doctrine, which again, nobody exactly knows what the rules are, pushing every other possible idea to the side, such that the CEO of Twitter himself has to apologize for eating a chicken sandwich in the month of June. Well, of course, I'm harping on this a little bit. I just find it ironic that so many people want to have freedom, and yet they turn to a movement that has an increasing amount of rules on top of rules, new rules in the middle of the game. How about this? How about we simplify things for a moment? How about we go back to what Jesus said? You know, one time a scholar asked Jesus, what are the two most important rules or laws of the Old Testament? And Jesus was able to reduce it to two things. Number one, he said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. And if you'd like to add a second rule, how about this one? Love your neighbor as yourself. Now, of course, the New Testament moral framework is a little bit more complicated than that. There is a whole lot to say about the Old Testament laws in regard to the Ten Commandments and other such things, and we can discuss these on another occasion. But at least Christianity has the advantage of knowing what the rules are, so that we don't have to add new rules in the middle of the game. At least with Christianity, you know what the Ten Commandments are because they're written somewhere. You know from whence these moral laws come because the authority over which they are inscribed is the Lord God himself. So unlike progressivism, where there's an unending amount of new rules added to the middle of the game, Christianity defines our moral framework very clearly in the pages of our Old and New Testaments. Well, hopefully you're not violating somebody else's social justice code of conduct. Otherwise, you might find yourself unable to eat chicken sandwiches in the month of June. Well, listen, that's all I have for you today. Hope you enjoyed this video. Feel free to like, subscribe, share, whatever you want to do. There's great stuff on the internet. This is just some of it. Anyways, thanks for checking in. Love you lots, and we'll talk to you later.